Thank you so much. Such a pleasure having you on the show, the Ex-Monks Tribe. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thanks for having me here.
You know what? The day you said that you are coming on this show and you agreed, I started reading about you. And the first thing that caught my attention, that you are known as a pitch whisperer.
Yes.
How did you get this title, pitch whisperer, for yourself?
Well, Anthem Insurance was interviewing me to be a speaker at their annual meeting, and I had asked them a question. I said, what's happening after I speak if I'm the speaker? They said, well, later in the day we're going to have an improvisation session and have people from the audience shout out objections to the people on stage who will be role-playing, some being the doctors, some being people from Anthem. And I said, what if I stayed and would be on stage with those people and I could whisper in their ear something from my talk if they got stuck? Because improvisation is all about yes and keeping the conversation going. They loved that idea so much they hired me, and then people said, oh my gosh, could you be in my ear all the time when I'm out in the sales field? And I told this story to Inc. magazine, and Inc. said, wow, you're the pitch whisperer. And I said, oh, I love that. And so I went ahead and had that trademarked and registered. So now if you Google the pitch whisperer, a lot of my content will show up.
Fantastic. That's how you got your name, pitch whisperer.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dive in your life story. You have worked as a lifeguard trainer.
I have, yes. In fact, my TEDx talk, Be the Lifeguard of Your Own Life, I talk about as a lifeguard when I was in school, seeing this young girl on the edge of a high dive, and I could tell she had a lot of fear, and I go, oh boy, this is probably her first time jumping off. And sure enough, she jumps off, and I know she's underwater 2 seconds too long. And I thought, oh, I've got to jump in and save her because she's too panicked, flailing at the top to even grab a buoy. And so I was able to do that and then pull her to the side. And she was choking and coughing, but I knew she was going to be okay. But that lesson of not panicking and staying calm has stayed with me my entire career.
Yeah. In fact, that was the question that I wanted to ask you. Mm-hmm. And thank you so much for all these magic tricks, because I know you are a magician as well. Apart from the pitch whisperer that you are.
Yes.
So just curious, what are the lessons that you have learned from being the lifeguard trainer that you continue to use today as well?
Well, the big one was when I got laid off in 2008. And, the economy was bad with the mortgage crisis. And my boss from New York, I was in LA at the time, said, we need to clear out your office in 24 hours by the end of the day. And, it felt like a kick to the gut. But my lifeguard training kicked in, so I didn't completely panic. And I said, well, wouldn't you like a status report of where these ads that are booked should appear? And she goes, well, that'd be amazing. But everyone else is so angry in the other offices and half the people in New York that we had to lay off that they're just storming out. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I've watched these people get married and have kids. And little did I know that one decision to give the status report and not panic caused me to get rehired 2 years later. And I ended up winning Salesperson of the Year for the whole company of 400 salespeople at Condé Nast. So that ability to not panic and stay calm not only helps me in my career, but in my personal life. I recently bought a new house here in Austin. And we had this huge lightning storm, and the rain was coming down sideways. And I had just walked into the new house with the new keys, and the next thing I know, water is coming through the light fixture, through the ceiling. And I went, okay, that's not good. And, I grabbed the drawer from the refrigerator to keep the water from overflowing onto the floor. And luckily it stopped. That I called the builder, and they said, we'll have somebody out there right away in the morning. And I said to my friends, a little bit of drama. And they said, a little? And I said, well, I would say big drama too if the ceiling collapsed. And they said, wow, what a great attitude.
Yeah.
And I said, well, that must be the lifeguard training again.
Yeah. And it would be fair for me to say that you don't get stressed too easily because of the training that you got as the lifeguard trainer, right?
Well, we all get stressed out. I'm not saying I don't get stressed, believe me. But what causes our stress? It's our thoughts. So if I rearrange the word stress and spell it from front to back, it turns into something pleasant, like desserts. And we can rearrange our thoughts the same way and turn that negative thinking into something pleasant. So we're the thinker thinking the thoughts. The thoughts don't think us.
I just love the way you play with your technical abilities to
Hmm.
play stress, and then suddenly before people start to read stressed, something else appears, right? The way you were
Yes.
playing with your undercurrent divings and all that. So John, just curious, you are an author as well of two books, including
Hmm.
Better Selling Through Storytelling, and I have read that book and I found it quite fascinating. There are a lot of things I've picked up from that book. And the second one is The Successful Pitch. The first book that I'm talking about, the one that I've read, right? Better Selling Through Storytelling.
Yes.
In the very first few pages, it talks about scarcity mentality and the abundance mentality generation.
Mm.
Now, tell me more about that. What is that? What is
Well,
the difference between these two
yes.
mindset generations?
That's the foreword written by my dear friend of many years, Tim Sanders.
Yeah,
And his concept is that you either have an abundance mindset and believe that when there's more than enough for everyone, or you have a scarcity mindset and it's a zero sum game. You think if I win, you lose, as opposed to everybody winning. And so I think if you come, it reminds me of Einstein, who said, you have a big decision to make. You either think the world is a friendly, safe place or you don't. And then you tend to go around looking for evidence to support your belief.
yeah, yeah,
So I think if you come from an abundance mindset, then you're willing to help other people. And if you come from a scarcity mindset, you're hoarding everything.
yeah. And I just love that story. And thank you so much for bringing that story of Einstein.
Mm.
When a reporter asked him, what's the question that you have to ask? And he said exactly what you're talking about. Do you look at the world as a friendly place? And
Yes.
he said, because based on that, either you would create fences or you are going to create bridges.
Nice.
What a fascinating metaphor that is. So,
Indeed. You're either trying to, you know, be alone and isolate yourself. And we all know from the pandemic that's not healthy psychologically. In fact, in prison, the worst thing they can do to you is put you in solitary confinement.
yeah.
So I think the awareness that we don't want to do that, we need other people, we need to connect for our own mental health.
One thing that I found in your book is the way you were playing with metaphors.
Mhm.
And one of the metaphors that you've used is that one should look at self as stock. What does that mean? Why would you look at yourself as stocks?
Well, when I was starting working for myself as opposed to a company, it required a lot of investment in equipment, in software, and all kinds of things before a lot of money was coming in. And I thought, I just have to think of myself as a stock, whether it's Apple or Tesla. I'm a stock, and I'm going to invest in myself. And I know my skill set, I know my work ethic. I think that's a pretty good investment. So when you are thinking about whether you're going to invest in learning something, taking a course, for example, expanding your knowledge, your skill set, and you think of yourself as a stock that is probably going to go up in value from that investment, it helps you not get so afraid to put money into yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So were you always like that, or because, as you mentioned, that you were laid off, uh,
Hmm.
you started looking at yourself as stocks and you need to continue to invest in yourself? What was that point when this learning came through your way?
Well, I've always been a curious person, and I've always loved to learn. And I've had the good fortune of being able to take a lot of courses on speaking and writing, and I just think it's an ongoing process.
Hmm.
And so it's all about our priorities, isn't it? Do I want a fancy sports car, or do I want to learn and spend my money that way? So it's all just what you value, I think.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, how do I look at my own learning? And
Mm.
how do I look at that I stay relevant? And I think one of my ways is being in touch with friends like you who have been extremely kind to me for all these years. And every conversation that I end up having with people like you, with friends like you, they continue to feed a lot of information a lot of new perspectives to me.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
here's an example. Um, as a speaker, when live events stopped, I had to pivot and become a speaker on virtual events. And I became aware of something called Ecamm that allows me to do special effects on Zoom calls like I'm doing now. And no clients were asking me to do this, but I thought I either am going to become Netflix in my speaking career or Blockbuster and stay in the past. And so I decided to make the investment in money to upgrade my computer and buy the software and hire someone to train me so that when I'm talking about butterflies in our stomachs when we get nervous, that the goal is not to get rid of them, but to get the butterflies in our stomachs to fly in
Look
formation
at
like I'm seeing on my
that.
screen. Yes.
Look
So
at
now I've
that.
created something that looks a little bit like Pixar and the animation that it pulls them in. So my stories now are enhanced. So that's how I can keep hundreds of people engaged on a Zoom call because it's not just another Zoom call. But that was a decision I made to invest in upping my game. No one was asking me to do it. I wanted to be proactive.
If you look at today's time, right, most of us are going through transitions in our lives.
Hmm.
Transition from one job to another, transition from one way of being in our lives to another, losing somebody very close to us, losing a job, careers are
Mm.
being disrupted at a race never experienced before.
Yes.
So, what's your piece of advice to handle transition since you have handled transitions in your life?
I would say the biggest piece of advice is to think of yourself as the lifeguard of your own life.
Hmm.
Like, unlike in a hurricane when they send a helicopter in to rescue people who didn't evacuate, no one's going to come rescue you. You have to be your own lifeguard. And change is inevitable. And so we have a choice to either embrace it or resist it. And when you realize, oh, it's time to learn something new, as I'm going to embrace learning something new as opposed to resenting it. Once you have that attitude of, okay, something new to learn, as opposed to, oh, I don't want to have to learn one more thing, it totally changes how you interact. It's either easy or hard depending on your attitude. So I would say instead of being shocked that something's changed or been disrupted, you just like, that's part of life. And I mean, the seasons change and nature, and we don't get upset. We know that's just part of nature. And so I think just having an awareness that nothing stays the same forever, including our body, allows us to embrace that.
John, how did you get these deep insights? Because what you're saying is, I can look at that. Several people have written in that book, but the way you are speaking, it just lands.
Hmm.
I mean, I know that you know.
Well, I would say it's years of self exploration, self acceptance. When I realized that there's two things that everybody needs to figure out. One is that who they are is enough. And so when you have that premise that you are enough, then you can still take action and create things, or write a book, or whatever it is, but you're doing it from such a place of contentment as opposed to being frenetic and doing it because maybe if I write this book and enough people like it, then I'll feel good enough.
Hmm.
But if you already feel good enough and you create a book and people like it, then it's like, oh, how nice. But I'm not looking for other people's opinions or outside circumstances or awards to make me feel enough. I already feel enough. And then the other big part of it is when we're interacting with other people, we have to remember that everybody wants to feel seen and heard and appreciated. It goes back to childhood. When you're a kid and you jump off the diving board at a pool and you say, hey, Dad, Mom, watch me jump off the board. You want to be seen and heard by someone you love. And so when you're interacting with coworkers or if you're a manager of people, it's the same thing. When you're talking to potential people who will hire you, they want to feel seen and heard. I remember recently I got hired to speak at a real estate company, and my agent called and said, they interviewed you and two other people, and they decided to pick you because They liked your energy. And later I was talking to the person who hired me. She said, yeah, I just felt so good talking to you. I figured if I felt this good talking to you about what we wanted to create and what you could bring to it, that when I put you in front of our entire team of 400 people, that you'd make them all feel good. And I think when we remember that people buy our energy, not our particular product or service, then we approach it from a completely different standpoint.
I'm still playing with the 3 words that you said, that I am enough.
Mm.
And I'm just wondering, in my life, do I operate from that space? At times, yes. Most
Yeah.
of the times, no. Why? Because there's a deep need in me to evaluate how well am I doing based on the external factors. And I think somewhere in your book, you have mentioned about that as well, that how the way we look at ourselves from the lens of the external lens has impact on our self-esteem as well. So what's that relationship, if you may want to dig deeper?
I tell everybody that you're the movie director of your own life. And, the only place there's any peace of mind is in the present moment, right here, right now with you. If I start worrying about what happened in the past or reliving something that somebody said or did that upset me, I'm not in the moment, I'm not happy. Or if I start playing a horror movie of all the potential things that could go wrong in my life, that's not a happy place either. But if I remember that I'm the movie director, I can say, cut. And I stop playing that horror movie in my head of the future. And I can recast it and change the location. And that is how I allow myself to stay in the moment. And also, I have a 5-5-5 rule. When I get upset with something, I say, will this matter 5 minutes from now? How about 5 days from now? Will I even be thinking about this 5 weeks or 5 months or let alone 5 years from now? Probably not. So you keep zooming out until it seems insignificant.
Right, 5-5-5. Wow, is it going to matter to me 5 minutes from now, 5 days from now, 5 weeks from now, 5 months from now, 5 years from now? And the moment I continue to zoom myself out, of course, the state that I'm going through, it'll get minimized, right?
Yes.
Ah,
Yeah, because a movie director, remember, has a lens, and they can do a close-up or they can zoom out.
wow. So that means it has a direct impact on the narrative that I'm living from.
Exactly. Yeah, because the story we tell ourselves is the most important story we'll ever tell.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
And then once we're telling ourselves a story that other people might want to hear, then that's why I'm such a passionate person about teaching other people to become black belts in storytelling, because
Yeah.
it also helps you in your career, because instead of pushing out information, you're telling a story that tugs at people's heartstrings, and that's what makes them want to open the purse strings. And a good story pulls people in emotionally.
Something that intrigued me in your book, Better Selling Through Storytelling, you have written somewhere that let selling come from a space of spiritual integrity. For me, that was like, I was hooked.
Right. For example, if you say you're going to put someone's ad on a certain page on a certain issue, you do that. If you say you're going to show up at a certain time, you do that. So integrity is just a basic minimum of you do what you say you're going to do. And so when that happens, you start to build trust, because the old way of selling would be, in order to get people to buy from me, they have to know, like, and trust me. That behavior and that belief, let me push out information. Do you know enough about me now? You want one more fact to make you buy? But people buy emotionally. So we have to start with trust first.
So
it's a gut thing.
Got it.
And then it goes from our stomach. The handshake was to show we didn't have a weapon in our hand. Literally, trust gets transferred. When you introduce me to your audience, they trust me because they trust you. Then it goes from the gut to the heart. Do I like you? And the best way to increase your likability is to show empathy. The better you explain someone's problem, the better they think you have their solution. And then it goes to the head. And it's still not about knowledge. Here's the unspoken question everybody has when they're thinking they might want to buy something from you or hire you. Will this work for me? If they don't think it will. They might trust and like you. They're still not going to buy. But when you tell a story that they see themselves in, then they go, oh, this would work for me. It's that person that you're describing that you helped sounds like me, and I want to go on that journey with you.
Yeah. So rather than following the path of knowing, liking, and trusting, what I'm listening is that we need to reverse the process. Because as you said it, that people buy for the emotional reasons and then they validate it with the logical reasoning that they might have, or they might want to create to validate what they believe in. Is my understanding right?
Yes, exactly.
So does it happen in all the stories? I mean, you've spoken about different genres of stories in your book, whether you're talking
Right.
about rags to riches, you spoke
Yeah.
about quest, rebirth, and staying home or deciding to go on a trip, right? So my request is if you could talk about a little bit on these four different genres.
Well, no matter what story you're telling, it requires you to have all three of those. So you always want to build trust. You want to build likability, and so you just have to decide what is the best story genre that person's going to relate to. So, for example, if I am talking to Olympus Medical, and they were saying, we tell doctors our equipment makes surgeries go 30% faster. I said, there's no story there. So I worked with them on the story of imagine how happy Dr. Higgins was 6 months ago using our equipment. He could go out to the patient's family in the waiting room an hour earlier than expected and put them out of their waiting misery and say, good news, the scope shows they don't have cancer. And then the doctor turns to the rep and says, that's why I became a doctor, for moments like this. Now that rep tells that story to another doctor who sees themselves in the story and says, that's why I became a doctor too. And so that's an example of tugging at heartstrings, pulling people in. The people at Olympus said, oh, that gives us chills. Not only are we not telling stories, but we never thought to make the patient's family a character in the story. So you're not the hero of the story. Your client is. You're the Sherpa helping that client have a better life or look good. And so when you think of genres like Rebirth, It's a Wonderful Life, an old Jimmy Stewart Christmas movie, about getting a second chance. Prudential uses that in their ad campaign. Your retirement is not just a continuation of middle age, it's a rebirth. Let us help you. And so depending on who you're talking to, you can figure out, or do I want to use to tell my story?
I think that's where your speciality shines, where you walk with your audience, helps them look at which genre that they would like to follow that will allow them to be the superstar in their own movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, John, I'm just wondering, what's that one story that has had the everlasting impact onto you, the way you look at your life?
Oh my goodness. The one story that's had such an impact on how I look at my life. Well, I would go back to the story of being laid off, because that was such a shock. Even though I know and teach that who we are is bigger than our identity is bigger than our job. When you lose your job, it was challenging not to lose my identity. And so that particular story really resonated. Also, I was talking to Allison Levine, who's a speaker, and I'm a speaker, and she was telling me the story of how she got her speaking career started. She was one of the first women to climb Mount Everest. And so, obviously people like to hear that story when she speaks, but she couldn't get a speaking agent right away. And they said, oh, there's a guy who climbed Mount Everest and he lost a limb. Did you lose a limb, Allison? And she's like, and I thought, wow, it's just sometimes never enough. And then finally she found somebody who said, come in and give us 10 minutes of the whole hour, the best 10 minutes. And she did. And they go, we think we could book you. And then she didn't hear anything for 6 months. And I thought to myself, oh, what are you saying to yourself during those 6 months? Sometimes you think you got your big break and still nothing happens. And then they called her out of the blue and said, hey, can you be in Las Vegas tomorrow? There's somebody who was supposed to speak and they got sick and canceled. And So she said yes, and so she had to speak in front of 6,000 people the next day, and she stayed up all night preparing for it, and that's what she nailed it, and that ability to be ready when the opportunity comes has really stuck with me, and to not let yourself give up that something you are going to get your big break.
So beautiful. And it resonates with me when you're saying that get ready and don't wait for the opportunity to knock your door, because when the opportunity knocks, it's not going to ask you. It's not going to whisper in your ear, John, are you
Yeah.
ready?
A story of when I was traveling after college and I was in India, and I specifically went to go see the Taj Mahal. And I was very careful with my money back then, as I am now, but especially then at young. And when you change countries, you change currencies, and you kind of lose money when you do that. So I was really methodical about how much money do I need to be in India, and convert it to that currency. And I flew from Delhi to Agra, and it was at nighttime, and I was excited to see the Taj Mahal at night. And I got into the cab, and I had enough money to pay him to get me there. And then I realized I didn't have enough money to get in. And I was like, oh no. And he goes, what's the matter? And I explained the situation to him, and he said, I'll loan you the money. Just send it to me when you get back. That act of kindness just still to this day moves me so much, because I thought to myself, I can't believe I got all the way here and I'm not going to get to go see it. And of course I did send him the money in a note. But that was another example of unexpected kindness from strangers. And this is somebody who doesn't have a lot of money. He's a cab driver in Agra and didn't know me and still trusted me.
So in that moment, John, what shifted for you?
That just the connection that we all have, that we're human, and that we're all together, and that he cared enough about somebody he didn't know to make my dream come true of getting to see the Taj Mahal.
This reminded me first time when I landed Atlanta, and people told me 10 different stories about Atlanta, that please do take care of yourself. It's a place like this, it's a place like that. And I was extra cautious.
Mm.
And I remember an Afro-American, the cab driver, he took me from the airport to the hotel. And during that conversation, I was talking to him and I said, where are you from, sir? And he started talking about his life. He had 2 daughters and 1 son. And he was very gentle, very respectful. And during my conversation, I continued that conversation with him. And he mentioned that it's extremely important for me, sir, to treat all my guests with respect, because every time when a person lands at airport, the first person that he meets is the cab drivers.
Yes.
And either I'm going to leave a scar for you or I'm going to
Oh,
leave an impression for you.
nice.
I would choose to leave an impression. And that
Yes.
stayed with me. And when you are talking about the one
Mm-hmm.
that you met at Agra, it only
Yep.
reinforces that how it's so important that every time when I start to take responsibility
Yep.
of the space that I'm operating from, it
Mm-hmm.
might leave an impression rather than leaving the other person with a scar.
Yes, indeed. And when we all think of ourselves as part of a process, when people understand their bigger job, I'm not just a cab driver. There's that famous story of someone who's a janitor at NASA, and somebody was visiting, and they go, "This place is immaculate. Whoever is the janitor here really takes pride in their work." And the janitor said, "I'm not just a janitor. I helped put a man on the moon."
Yeah.
So when you feel part of the overall vision, then you realize your part is just as important as everyone else's part.
So, John, what do you stand for?
Ah,
I understand that you help people get better in storytellings so
yeah.
that they can sell better, so that they can pitch better.
Hmm. Big
This
purpose
is,
is to help as many people as possible get off what I call the self-esteem roller coaster, where we
tell
only
me,
feel good about ourselves if things are going great or we're hitting our quota in sales, and bad about ourselves if we're being laid off. And when we zoom out enough and we realize that who we are is bigger than any one thing happening to us, we are free of having our self-esteem go up and down, and that stays consistent
Mm,
regardless of what's happening. Wayne Dyer, who was a famous author and speaker, had said, if you squeeze an orange, you always get orange juice. Doesn't matter what time of day. Doesn't matter whether it's in the corner or in the center of the room. So what happens when we get squeezed and we're under pressure, or we're squeezed into a corner? Do we still get kindness and respect coming out, or do we get anger and fear coming out?
mm.
And so I love that analogy of staying consistent no matter what's happening to us.
But is that so easy? Because, if you look at, there's so much of tension, there's so much of grief that we all are going through in our
Mm-hmm.
lives. And
Yeah,
specifically, if you look at what's going around us, right?
yeah,
So if you squeeze, of course, what would come out would be grief. But
yeah.
what you're talking about, the self-esteem roller coaster or the mood elevator, what is expected is humanity. I'm sure that cab driver would be going through his own challenges in his life. But what came
Yes.
out was kindness.
Yeah.
So how,
Listen, we still need to express all of our feelings, from anger and grief and sadness to joy. Our feelings are like on a dimmer switch. If you only let yourself feel this much sadness, then you can only feel this much happiness. So the range has to be like a dimmer switch. And it's totally appropriate to have your feelings of grief and anger. That's part of being human. That's part of what's in the orange, if you will. But the difference is it doesn't come out and get projected onto other people if we heal it internally ourselves or have the ability to process it. Doesn't mean we have to be angry or so sad we can't function.
I'm just reflecting, what are those times when I start to project my inner fears onto others and give
Mm-hmm.
them my peace of mind, and later on
Mm-hmm.
how I regret that I
Mm-hmm.
should not have done that. Or I ask myself, had it been my boss, had it been with somebody with power, would I have dealt with that person with the
Mm-hmm.
same tonality?
Right.
And more often than
So
not,
there's a
I
great
get the
book
answer
called
no.
yeah. There's a great book called The Four Agreements, and it says don't take anything personally. And so what I do with people in sales is I say, let's not take rejection personally.
Mm,
And when I was buying my house, I went to the title company and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're running late." So 15 minutes later, 30 minutes later, I go out to the receptionist. I'm like, "How much longer?" She goes, "I don't know. It's never been this bad." At an hour, I started to get mad because my ego kicked in and said, "If I was somebody famous, you wouldn't make me wait like this." I'm like, "Oh, you're totally taking this personally. Who are you?
mm,
Like you're so important that your time is worth more." But I did have to be the squeaky wheel to finally get somebody else to come help me.
mm.
But we're always a choice of how we respond to anything, including being kept waiting for something.
So
So
beautiful.
we're human. We're going to make mistakes. It's all part of the learning process. You don't judge anything, including your mistakes.
And coming back to your book, by the way, I just finished 80% of your book in just one go. I was so hooked with the book, right? And you
Thank
have spoken about rejections. You have spoken about that, how at times, initially, people might seen, people might look through you, right? Where you'll find that as if you are invisible. And you
you.
have spoken about the five steps where
Yeah.
you can move from being invisible to being
Hmm.
irresistible.
Yes.
So
I,
would love to
I've
hear
created
from the horse's mouth.
I've created a ladder because the old way of selling again is to put percentages on. Oh, I'm not 90% sure this person's going to buy, 50% this person, but nobody thinks of themselves as a percentage.
Yeah.
So I tell people, put on your empathy hat and start to look at how does somebody see you? And so are you invisible to them? They've never heard of you or your company. It's like in a dating situation. Well, not you. You go to a dating situation, I'm sure, and you see somebody you're attracted to, they find you. But a lot of us feel invisible in those situations. And then you go up to insignificant. Again, and I don't know what's worse in dating, invisible or insignificant. But in business, maybe it's you're selling life insurance and somebody's 20 years old and they're like, that's insignificant to me. And then we get up to the interesting rung. Maybe you say something funny or clever and someone says, "Oh, I'm not going out with you yet, but I'm interested to keep talking to you." In the business world, this is when people say, "Oh, I'm interested, send me information," and then you hear nothing. It's like being stuck at the friend zone at work. And everybody I've ever worked with in sales has said, "Oh, I've been there." So I help them get out of the friend zone at work and become intriguing through storytelling and intrigue people enough to paint a picture, kind of like what I did with Anthem. I said, what if I stayed and worked with the team during the improvisation? They were intrigued to want to know more. And that's what made me become irresistible, and that's at the top of the ladder.
And through storytelling, one can move from the zone of invisible to irresistible.
Yes, but it's one rung at a time. Like you
Wow.
don't usually have a coffee date and meet somebody for the first time and ask them to marry you at the same time. So you don't go from invisible to irresistible. You move up. Many people make that mistake of reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn and then saying, "Hey, you want to buy something?" They don't build the relationship first.
So, John, if you can share a story from your life that was one of those seminal moments where you realized till yesterday he was not even willing to look at me, and today he's willing to pay me, I mean, whatever I'm asking for.
Well, I got a referral recently from someone, and they said, "Oh, a friend of mine is a lawyer, and he's struggling to figure out how to stand out against all the other lawyers, and he wants to work with you and have you coach him on his messaging and what he's saying to people, and what his story will be." I said, "Sure," and so that's invisible, obviously, and then he looked at my information before the call, and he was at least interested enough to set up a time to talk to me. And then I started asking him some personal questions. Why did you become a lawyer? What made you what do you think is your secret sauce? And he became so intrigued by my questions that he said, "I've got to hire you. This is fantastic. I've worked with a lot of other people over the years, but I've never met anybody who can help me not only be better in my career, but make me feel better about myself." And he said, "Whatever you're charging, it's not enough." So that's when you've become irresistible.
Wow. Yeah. But at the same time, John, I'm of an opinion that even potential customers, they're not very clear about what they want. And they're really confused. I'm sure you would have come across people like that.
Yes, well, all we can control is ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I'm very clear on I help sales teams and coaches and professional services people like lawyers and financial planners craft a story that makes them stand out in a sea of sameness so they become irresistible, because whoever tells the best story gets the sale.
Mm.
If you're not in that world, probably not a fit for you. And the more specific we get, and specifically I like to work with tech companies and healthcare companies. I've worked with other kinds of companies like Coca-Cola I've spoken to, but I'm really clear on this is my specialty. And when you become clear, then people can say either that's me or that's not me. It's like who this is for and who it's not for is really important. Even if the other person doesn't know what they need, if you know what you offer, they can either say, "I need that," or "I don't need that."
So, what has been your secret sauce in what you do?
My secret sauce is my ability to have empathetic listening that allows me to help people craft a story that's unique to them. Because after people become a storyteller, Plato said storytellers rule the world, and it's just as true then as it is today. And so helping people become storytellers helps them in their career and their personal life, and that's the impact I'm looking for. And I had a client who said he had a 7-year-old daughter who wanted him to read her tell me a bedtime story. Don't read one, make one up. And he said, "I didn't know how to do that, but now you help me tell stories for my business. Now I'm a better storyteller with my daughter."
And that must be really fulfilling.
It is,
Yeah, I'm,
yeah.
I'm not only a good storyteller in the boardroom, I'm
Yes,
a
in
good
the bedroom with my
storyteller with my
child.
daughter as well. Wow.
Yes. And the old way of selling is always be closing. Have you heard that phrase before?
Yeah.
ABC, push, push,
ABC. Yeah.
push.
Yeah.
So when I end my talks or workshops, I usually talk about ABK, always be kind. Write it down on a post-it note, ABK, so that when you think to yourself, the things we say to ourselves sometimes are harsh. If we can only give out what we give ourselves, so give yourself kindness. Be gentle with yourself, and then you can give it to the people you work with and the potential clients that you get to work with.
Always I share with people often that kindness and compassion will never go out of fashion.
Ah, so true.
And while I'm listening to you, there are two questions coming to me. You spoke about empathy, you spoke about kindness. In fact, in your book, you have written about loving presence.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is loving presence? I'm very intrigued about that. That's one. And the second question is you spoke about empathy. You come across different kinds of people. There are people who understand empathy, they understand your feeling. But
Yeah.
there are people who are just number driven. There are people who always look at the big picture. So, how would you express empathy to different categories of people that you come across?
Well, I think there's usually three kinds of buyers. There's the people who, you know, tell me what your vision is. I believe it. Let's. Then there's people who want to build something with you, and then there's people who just care about the numbers, the return on investment. And so, depending on whatever their way of expressing and analyzing things is, you show empathy for that. You say, "You must be under a lot of pressure to deliver with the best price possible." Oh, I am. And they see that you're in their shoes and not resenting the fact that they're asking pricing questions or ROI questions. It sounds like it's really important to you that this be customized and that we build it together as opposed to what we have existing already. Yes, that's a builder. Or imagine how happy you're going to be when you're going into your next presentation to tell someone why they should hire you versus another person, and you're going to have all these stories ready to go, how more confident you're going to be.
So, depending upon where the person is operating from, and you mentioned three different kinds of people, right? The first one you spoke about the big picture, the second one is the builder, the third one is the feeling kind. So, depending upon that, we
Mm-hmm.
need to show empathy. And you spoke about loving presence. What is that? I mean, why would you show loving presence in a
Oh,
sales
yes.
conversation?
Because we buy emotionally and then back it up with logic. So if you can explain, sounds like you're really struggling. What's keeping you up at night is you're so tired of coming in second place when you present against your competitors, aren't you? It's really frustrating how long it's taking people to decide to buy from you, isn't it? They're like, oh, somebody cares enough to understand how I'm feeling, and then that's the person I want to hire to help me come up with a solution to this problem.
So, thank you so much. I'm just shifting the gears, and I know we have got another 5-7 minutes that we are left with. Would love to dig a little deeper into your podcast, The Successful Pitch. And this is being selfish because I would like to learn a lot from you on how to be a better host on the podcast.
Sure.
You have interviewed different leaders, you have interviewed different authors, you have interviewed Michael Phelps as well, right? I'm just curious, what are the two best advices that you have received or that you have heard on your podcast?
Oh, Jay Samit, the author of Disrupt You, said, "Don't fear failure. Keep going until you get a zombie idea so great it won't die."
Mm-hmm.
I love that piece of advice.
That's one.
And I shared the other story about Allison climbing Mount Everest, that you never know. Treat every opportunity as if it's your big break.
So the first one is never fear failure. The second one is treat every opportunity as your best break.
As it could be your big break.
It could be a big break. Fantastic.
Right.
And one of those advices that you find it difficult to implement.
Oh boy, I would say not taking rejection personally. It still stings at first, and then I remember, don't take it personally. No now doesn't mean no forever. And coming from an abundance mindset instead of a scarcity mindset, there'll be somebody else who will want to hire and take my course or hire me as a speaker.
So thank you so much. Just curious, if you were to give a piece of advice to your 21-year-old self, what would that be?
You're on for an amazing adventure. You are enough. And don't worry about the future. because what you're going to have happen to you doesn't even exist yet.
So beautiful. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Such a pleasure having you. And
Likewise.
thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for your generosity, for sharing with open heart, and engaging us in those beautiful stories, whether those of diving into the to save somebody or the stories in the boardroom. So thank you so much. Such a pleasure having you here.
Well, talking with you, the time goes really, really fast. Thank you for having me.